Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Terra Prime Live Saber Academy. I am coming to you here from the headquarters here in Michigan. I know lots of people out there are going through some hard times with cold and everything like that. So um, we're up. We're all used to it up here, but we're all pulling for you. Anyway, so today we have got a good class here, so we'll kind of go back and forth. If people have some questions on the chat, go ahead and ask them. I thought I would discuss a couple of issues with some of the with some myths and misconceptions and criticisms and all of that kind of thing that come with kind of all of this martial art thing. There's a couple of specific ones that keep getting brought up, I think, a lot with all of this. And then there's kind of a general discussion that we can kind of have about real and fake and all of this other stuff, so that can help guide some people there. And we'll also bring this directly into how it's going to kind of help practice. So there are some misconceptions as people come into practice. I know a lot of people who come into sabering, this is their first real sport, their first real physical activity, not physical activity, but physical pastime or hobby. And there's a lot going on. So hopefully we will talk about that. Anywho, we've got James, Alex, and Jefferson. How you doing, Jeff? How you doing, guys? So we'll, as I said, we will kind of go through here and field some questions on the web as well. So the reason I started thinking about this is there was a discussion a while ago about whether or not fake martial arts is necessarily a bad thing. So in martial arts, now we have a special relationship with reality here in lightsaber land. We have kind of two issues of reality. We have the reality that we're making up, right? The costume, the names, the weapons, all of this other stuff. And then the reality that we're dealing with is the reality that we have physical objects that we're really doing things with, other people who are not being cooperative or not kind of just going along with us. So, so these are the kind of things. Now we try to push a kind of realistic attitude, but realistic in a particular context, because we also know that this is a sport and we have different things with different rules, and a different rule set may really encompass a different skill set. It may emphasize a specific strategy over another one, all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of variety out there. So reality in those senses is going to be conditional, right? So the reality of fighting or competing in ASL FFE in France, even versus here, is going to be a little bit different, which is going to be much different than if you're with the Saber Legion and you're doing that kind of thing, or any of the other things. And then even more different is the Ludosport idea, which, so you have kind of, I wouldn't say these are the boundaries, these aren't the extremities, but these are three examples of how, of widely divergent methods and approaches to this whole thing. Each of them contains within it a particular set of what we would consider reality. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to transfer over to the other things. Now, there are other things when we say reality is we have imagined scenarios, and there's a lot of these imagined scenarios which are given a lot of weight depending on who you're talking to. A lot of times when people are looking at and judging videos or judging other people's performances or whatever, they will bring these things up. And we there's not a lot of objective quality to that to that pursuit. There's a lot of talk recently about fake martial arts, real martial arts, especially in the Chinese martial arts community, because we have this guy Xu Dong who's going out and he's beating up Tai Chi masters and you know, all of these things. And we've talked about him a couple of times, but it brings up a point. And this is where the discussion is. Is it like if we have a different, let's take this and actually I might pick your brain, Jeff, here for a second, because you were among Ludo Sport, right? And our method is a little bit different. We have a few differences with them. You want to give us a kind of a description of what how they're approaching this?
Sure. You know, and the examples you picked, you know, are really good examples. Like you said, not necessarily the three poles or three extremes, but center of mass for the three different kinds of topologies of lightsaber fighting, if you will, as a sport. So Ludo Sport, when they designed their system, like all of us, and where we all have the same trunk of the tree, so to speak, all of those systems are sword analogs to one degree or another and draw their inspiration from sword arts. Even further, the Form 1s, everybody's version of a Form 1 sort of has, you know, parody, looks a little bit like the other guy's Form 1, etc. What Ludo Sport did specifically, and this is part of their design philosophy, so it wasn't an accident at all, it was a very deliberate idea to create a system that taught an enclosed rule set. Along with what you were saying with the sword forms is levels of protection, right? You know, different systems have different levels of requirement. You can loosely say they're light, medium, and heavy as far as protection requirements. Ludo Sport went completely light with their protection requirement because they built their safety measures into the system itself by having certain things not exist. You know, like for instance, there are no direct thrust, etc., like a lot of systems do. And they designed a sport where they have their philosophy, that kind of like a higher moral position, service, care, and respect. And so they wanted to, in the same way you can sort of use kendo to teach budo, etc. They sort of, you know, designed their system to reflect all that. So it's very much in a way an enclosed system designed to speak to itself, which is both its blessing and its curse. It's blessing because it's a uniform system. So anybody in Ludo Sport, you're getting Ludo Sport, you know, the angles of attack, the rule set, etc. It's all one enclosed thing. The downside is it's not quite as universal with other systems. But to that end, you know, and I was just thinking this, I was going to let you finish speaking before I piped in. When we're talking about, you know, the reality of martial arts, you know, I've seen various versions of this discussion before. Look, most of us who are the engines behind a lot of this are middle-aged swordsmen anyways. It's not like we're walking around with long swords or katanas defending ourselves. So already there's a level removed from reality. We try to maintain the essence and combat applicability, which is one of the things I like about TPLA. And I would say that a whole system in my mind treats it both as an art and a sport. So you have techniques that are part of your art that may not be applicable to a particular rule set, whatever that fighter is going to enter into. That's perfectly reasonable. When we look at the evolution of combat sports, they were originally training vehicles for actual combat arts that evolved into combat sports and became their own separate thing. None of that's good or bad. It's just a thing.
Yeah. I think one of the important things here too is like when you were saying Ludosport's system is set up within their rule set. And one of the big issues or differences that we a lot of times have is with what you said, protection, right? They go very, very, very light. Where I'm bringing this into as far as reality goes here is there is the argument. In fact, I just recently got a comment on a video doing this exact thing, which is more realistic, having protection on or having no protection.
Yeah.
And there's two ways to look at it. On one hand, do you want to, is it realistic to like how it looks in the movies, or is it realistic in a real sense? When we're talking about training here in TPLA, since we are trying to be more universal, like you can take these things and you can use them in any rule set necessarily. We have rule sets that we use, but they try to use all skills. Is we try to give people a good rounded education in it, and we use the gear because there is a realism in knowing that the other person is going to hit you, right? Like they will make contact. They're not going to stop the blade just short of you. That's not a part of it. It's actually going to make impact with you. So we take that aspect of the realism, and move forward with it. A lot of people who go for the lighter gear, they go for this aspect of you would be very, very afraid and you wouldn't do the things that you would necessarily do in sparring in a real situation if the threat of death was imminent and all of that. And true.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole different, can of worms that we could dissect one by one as to fighting theory. I mean, in my own background as a professional combatant training, municipal professionals and state sanctioned violence. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to look at this. And in Ludo sports, and this is probably true for the other light fighter guys, I'm not sure, but part of Ludo sports training philosophy is that you're gaining as a competitor, as an athlete, you're gaining a certain skill by learning to make the touches as fast and as light as possible, which admittedly you are. That takes a certain, motor skill finesse to be able to do that well, to make this ultra light contact, but be it fast and accurate, which is what, again, going back to the idea that they designed a sport that was insular to themselves, and that is a skill, a motor skill in their sport that makes perfect sense. And I was perfectly fine for it when I was still very active with them. Even though as a swordsman, I'm dramatically opposed to that. I'm dramatically opposed as a trainer and swordsman ever pulling blows. However, for their purpose and their intent, it was the perfect choice for what they were trying to do. And so we have to ask, what is the intent of these things? And I've seen these arguments too, in other settings, whether it be TSL or whatever. Guys arguing about realism. On one level, I can understand, but on another level, I'm like, come on, most of you guys. I mean, I don't want to come across as negative. A lot of the people talking have never been in real fights anyways. So they don't even know what real violence is, But aside from that, what is the intent we're trying to achieve? Yeah, I lean towards historical approaches, which is why I like TPLA as a swordsman who believes in a dojo way of the lightsaber kind of approach to it. But what is the intent we're trying to achieve? I prefer armoring up because I do like both feeling the blow and knowing that I can continue to work on follow through. For me, I come from a cutting tradition, lots of cutting. So, follow through, getting the steel through Goza is the thing you're always constantly working on. So obviously a light touch doesn't work for that. So I think it's intent. What are the intents? None of it's bad. All of it's just specific intent, and people get in these crazy arguments because they're not talking about, they're applying some unfitting hypothetical to a thing that wasn't designed for it anyways.
Right. Now, where that a lot of times comes in is when people are watching people do solo forms or do practice forms or something like this. I get this ton because you have particular movements. Like if we're going through, you know, like an Ataru type of thing where I'm spinning around like this, right? Oh, well, you never turn your back on your opponent, blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, 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 right? And to what you said earlier is there's a lot of people who say this stuff who've never been in a fight. The thing about it is anything can happen in a fight, right? You have zero idea of what's going to happen. And this is one of the reasons that people who are really into combative stuff, like real combat stuff like that, part of the art and part of the science of fighting is everything that happens up before the blows. If you can stop it before the blows start, you have won. Because once the blows start, it's anybody's game, right? You don't know if they have a hidden weapon. You don't know if you're going to trip, fall over a chair, and break your neck. I mean, it's just, you know, incredible. So when you're training and you're thinking about these things, like let's be realistic. Another thing that I saw over the week was people saying that you know, because of a lightsaber, you don't need force or anything like that. You would always hold it like this. And that's anybody who's done this game for in a little bit knows you would not do that because it would be, your hands are completely open. You have no guard, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to get tagged a lot, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's counterintuitive, even with regular swords, of which we're taking from. Right. So let's talk about a couple of these specific things here where you have, let's talk about follow through, right? Follow through versus overswing. People are constantly saying, you know, oh, look, you've left yourself completely open here. Like, sort of. It depends on where my opponent is in relation to me, what I'm planning to do next, right? Because there are rear guards in all systems. We were holding our back. Why do you do that? You're inviting people to come in. You're basically, as in Chinese, we say you're opening the door. I open up this door because I want you to attack here. I have a plan. I want this attack to come over from this area so I can do something specific, right? Or at least try to, right? But the thing is that since in an actual engagement, and if you go back and watch our sparring videos, and hopefully we'll be getting some new ones soon because we're starting to open back up, but you'll see that we're constantly changing positions, right? We're never in one position for any really long length of time. We're constantly changing, we're moving, looking at what the other person is doing, right? If you see somebody camping out in a position, right, that's a clue. They want you to do something, right? They're trying to get you to do something specific, right? So when there's a lot of people who will say, oh, well, you don't want to overswing when you cut, you want to just stop right here. It depends on what you're doing, right? When you are practicing your body mechanics, you want that follow through. Not only because this is something that will happen, especially in this game, a lot, which is you go for a strike and you miss, you hit air, right? You're not planning to pull that strike back. So having a follow through where you can then recover without having to, and then try to pull that thing back, very, very useful. We talked about that a lot of times with the orbits as being one of those things.
Yeah, if I could just add a couple things. I mean, I think you're spot on in your observations, and I think a couple things. We as trainers, it's an opportunity for us to teach context and intention, because a lot of people mimic the things they see, don't understand the context or intention for them, and then it's easy from a general perspective to say, oh, you wouldn't do that. Well, yeah, normally in most situations, you don't want to turn your back on your adversary. However, there are times when both you and your adversary are in transition and movement, in which case you're turning on him to regain the line because he is also moving. So there, you know, and just like that's a great example of the follow through versus overcutting. Overcutting is bad, especially if you did it on accident or due to lack of skill. You could hit your skill cap. But it may be a necessary thing, getting the blade all the way through the cutting angle if you're actually truly trying to cut something. I mean, as soon as you start stacking Goza, and you've got more than one roll, you've got 3 or 4 of them, to get the blade through, you're going to have to put some power generation into that cut. And that becomes part of the training. How do I get follow through without overcutting? And, so you cut a few times. Okay, the novelty of cutting is over. It's boring now. Now you can do the real training, which is get a good clean cut with good, post cut forensics, but maintain blade to line as much as possible for that cut. So it's context and intent. And I think as teachers, that gives us an opportunity. And then there are people who, don't understand the context or intent, will generically judge something and say, oh, well, yeah, okay. So normally, no, I agree with you. We want point line domination. We don't want to turn our backs, but there are times we do.
And there's this. You can, and this is what I usually respond with. It's like, sure, you don't want to turn your back on your opponent, but don't you always want to take their back?
Yes.
So you got to assume your opponent is trying to get behind you, right? And how do you prevent that from happening? Well, you turn, you spin, right? If he's walking around you and you turn with him, he cannot get your back, or she, or whoever you're going against. Then there's this. I bring this up a lot because it was pretty funny. There was, I don't know if it was a National Geographic or something like that, where they had MMA fighters go with Marines and try to do Marine training.
Yeah.
Right. And they were doing the thing in the woods where they're like all that kind of stuff. And these MMA fighters who thought, it was absolutely astounding how, like, you're watching this, you're going, how can you be so stupid? He's standing right there. But they're in that mindset of, my opponent is in front of me. Right. That's where my opponent is. So when they had 2 opponents, or they had people where they didn't actually know where they were, I mean, they would I saw one dude literally walk in between 2 guys, and the Marines were just kind of like, okay.
Yeah. Situational. Yeah. I'd say that's another great example. And also, you can speak to this historically in so many arts. There's a difference between a purely dueling art, late period for most of our stuff, versus a battlefield art, which is meant for multiple combatants, and in the context of a large engagement.
But you know what? More importantly than multiple combatants, you're working within a team. There's multiple allies as well, right?
Yeah.
And this is a huge component, because when you're fighting on battlefield, you're not in little duels, right? You're working as a machine, Yeah, exactly, John. Yeah, you're making big things. You may be standing there for 10 minutes before you do one strike because some guy got past the spears.
And because you're in a line or a phalanx, it may be a limited range of motion you're using as well.
Exactly, right. You're real close. That shields. You're going to have all kinds of other things that come in there. So a lot of spinning techniques are used in formation warfare like that, because you have these tiny little areas, and if I can just spin through like along a spear, I can either get inside the enemy spear, right, or I can get a little bit momentum to get a good strike going at whatever it is.
Or to spin parry past their spear as they're advancing. Yeah,
it's. So that's a total, when people are talking about battlefield, I think a lot of times people are thinking of like little duels happening all over the place, right?
That's how you lose. Look, it's basic PvP. If I see, two dudes at it, I'm going to jump in on my sides,
Right.
and uneven the fight. So there's a rule where I come from. If you're in a fair fight, you're unprepared. You've done something wrong. Right. So yeah,
No, I mean, I mean, that is a valid strategy. I will not, I'm not going to take my chances with equal, right? I have to hedge my bets. And if I don't have that hedge, nope, I don't care. Oh, you're a coward.
I'm
Okay.
affected. Yeah,
See
I
you
mean,
later.
that's another whole topic. This idea about honor duels and how they work, and what was the honor taught in warrior systems, etc. There's a bunch of myth around that as well, but that's its own
Yeah.
topic.
So now where does this come in as far as training is pretty much when you see something that we do, there are certain constraints that you want to do, but you want to keep those biomechanical, meaning I don't want my knee to go too far forward in relation to my hips and my angle. I want to keep all my body mechanics there, not because I'm opening up my head to get struck, or not because this, that, or the other, but I might hurt my knee, right? It's not good. It's not good body mechanics. So when we're talking about sports, we're talking about martial arts and everything. Like the one thing both of these things have in training, and somebody asked a question on the thing about choreography, which we'll get to here in a second, is the training. The training for all of this, whether you're doing sport, whether you're doing this, that, or the other, the training is often identical. And this was where I think a lot of people get confused with the different context, right? You're doing the same thing. Why, how is it so different? And it's because there's a physical component to all of this, right? We are dealing with our bodies, right? Even if you're talking Star Wars universe and you're talking about the Force, right? When they use the Force to augment their strength or to jump really high, they're not changing their body at all. They're using those body mechanics. They don't just sit there and float up like, without doing anything. They do a jump and then they accentuate that. So there's mechanics involved in all of this. And those are very, very important. Not necessarily, from a realism point of view, but you have to remember too, realistically, in the past, people did a lot of stuff that was harmful to them because they didn't live long enough to see the detrimental.
They still do it now.
Right? Yeah. But if you're talking about your knee, right? Hurdler stretches and stuff like this. And people say, well, they used to do hurdler stretches all over the place back in the day. Yeah. Back when they were living to, 50, 60 years old, right? Most of these people who are very, very active, right? Because when you're active without modern medicine, you tend to die more because you get injured and all this other stuff. So you don't have the long-term stuff. Now we have a lot of that information. We know what's kind of going on. So that's where the body mechanics things goes in. When you're doing spins, another thing, again, we always talk about how spinning, we talk about how it's used in certain cases, but how it's used in all cases is when you spin around and you do this more and more, you have to unfocus and focus your eyes, right? So you have to let the world go around and then you have to pick a spot, right? And there's all kinds of tricks that you can do this. Like dancers will pick a spot, they'll go here and they'll flip their head as they go around, all of that kind of thing. But whatever you do, the disorientation that comes from quickly spinning around and trying to go somewhere else, right? As you train that, you will desensitize that part of your nervous system, right? You won't get dizzy as easy, right? And I can speak from this from personal experiences when I started doing spinning and stuff like that. I remember I could take harder hits to the jaw because it wouldn't wobble me as much. Now I don't do that anymore because I'm too damn old. But so that's the thing. So when you're going through this, when you're going through your sheet show, right? Our things are here. When we might tell some people, this might be considered an overswing, right? Because when I get to about here, this hand kind of lets go and here, so that if I was going through with real big power, the mechanics of the blade would keep going. I wouldn't be able to stop it. The whole point of the follow through is we're controlling whatever strike that is, right? So boom. Now, again, when you stop something, you also help the acceleration aspect of that thing. So when we're doing, what's why you want to do large swings, medium swings, and small, right? Because all of these things are different to your body, and you want to do them. No matter what your context, no matter if you're doing this, you know, whether you're doing Ludosport, whether you're doing ASL, whatever you do, the control, the athleticism is really universal. And that's the point of the training, pretty much of hopefully most training. Now let's see. One-on-one battlefield combat is very TV movie quality combat. Yes, to its point. Now there is the situation of the melee where things break down. It's usually near the end of the battle or whatever, and the kind of formations break
because the
down.
route is usually followed right after the lines break, and it's
Yeah.
individual melee. There's usually a route by one side or the other.
Exactly.
Post haste.
Right. So you basically everybody kind of breaks up. You get little squads. You have the situations like Jeff was talking about where, oh, my buddy is over there. He's fighting two guys. Hey guys, let's go help him. That kind of thing. So, yeah, things are constantly changing. Now let's talk about choreography, because we have a question here. How does one get involved in video film contests? Probably just do some things. So we'll give you some hints on how to do them, because I don't really know the specifics of signing up for these things. But and then somebody says, has any of you actually faced a shield wall with pole arms? John, you might have, because
I have as well, actually.
Several
okay,
times.
so we have couple of SCA.
Yeah, I'm a former Scadian.
Yep.
Okay. So
I'm a
what's
semi
that?
maybe current.
Give us a little rundown on what it's like facing a shield wall with pole arms.
Well, it depends on what you're fighting with. If you're when on the battlefield, right, a sword is a sidearm. It should probably not be your primary weapon.
Right.
If it is, unless it's really mucking big, you're probably in trouble. So I fought with a 9-foot spear as my primary battlefield weapon. So facing a shield wall with pole arms was, target practice for me, right? Because like I was behind my own shield wall with a spear. So that was I have fought with pole arms, and the shields usually get about this close, and then they spear, and then one side decides to try to crush, and then it's like with the guys with the spears jump back as much as you can and let the guys with pole arms go in, and they try to swing over the shields, and it's very interesting. It's very fun. I mean, but it's fighting with a sword in that situation becomes
It's almost impossible. You can't fit.
Yeah.
Just to add to John, he's spot on with everything. I think one of the cool things that come out of that kind of fighting is it opens up to you techniques that you would not have thought of before. For instance, spear or halberd over the shield wall, specifically with spear, there's angle shots that guys make where they're not going for the guy right in front of them. They're going for the guy to the left or right of him. And it's hard to see that thing coming, especially if you're wearing a helm, because it's coming in at that 45 oblique.
Yep. And
so guys get really good at that particular shot. And you would not think about it if you were just training the spear out of that context. And look, the truth is although the sword, and I'm a swordsman through and through, I love the thing. It's emblematic of the warrior classes. The truth is the battlefield for at least 1,000 years was run by the spear and the bow. That's how you won wars.
Yep.
I mean, you look at the hordes of the East, they won with the short bow on horseback. That's how they almost, conquered the whole world. So I love the sword. It's my thing. But, the truth be told, there's a whole inventory of stuff that we don't get to play with per se with the lightsaber.
But yeah, to Jeff's point, my spear brother and I, so to speak, you pop a corner of a shield, creates an opening, dead shieldman. Hook the corner of a shield using a long kamayari, right, with the bladed off hook, where Japanese in the style and the thing. Hook the corner shield, pull it open for him, bang, in. He'd pop a corner, slide right through and take another guy out. So together, working in tandem, two spearmen, we've in our glory days, in the ancient days of long past of the 2000 of the early 2000s, we were feared and respected because our armor was unique, and people literally shield wall stepped back away from us when we stepped to the front of the line. So, oh, the good old days.
Yeah.
But yes, unless you have a very large sword that has a great reach, it's not, unless you're fighting with a shield, right, in that shield wall. And then we're back to the battlefield techniques of thrusting between gaps, reaching over for quick strikes.
Right. I mean, look at the
pinning,
Romans.
pinning. Yeah,
The
exactly.
gladius was a short weapon designed primarily for thrusting. It had its cutting value, but it was designed specifically for that formation because you're limited on your range of movement. And so a lot of the long, beautiful arcs we can get with a sword outside of that formation you don't get to do. And the Romans, being the military strategists and utilitarians that they were, said, well, what's most of our killing done with? In our context, most of our killing is done with the thrust. So they designed everything around that, cram everybody together, make them one giant turtle, and then thrust out of it. And the spear is just a magnification of that idea.
Yeah. So, yeah. And the thing is Shicho, the one I'm doing is based very, very much on military kind of battlefield stuff. That's why it's also very linear. It's very narrow. And that's the thing. Even when we're coming through here like this, whereas the strike is very long here, right? You notice that it's pretty much staying within my immediate kind of range, right? Now, we're doing this so that we can kind of duel with each other. So why are we doing that? And it's because there is a value to just even being able to constrain that kind of thing. When you're training, right? You have to remember that there's so much of this myth, and this is probably one of the biggest myths, is that what you train is what you're going to do. That has no. You have to train a lot so that you can be sure that you will do what you train, right? That takes effort. Right?
It takes thousands of repetitions. I mean, just to give you an idea, so in a past life, the things I used to do teaching people, one of the things we used to do is dissect what sportsmen and athletes and combatants who were trained in martial arts did in the circumstances when they faced real violence. The vast majority of them defaulted to primary gross motor extensor muscle set movement, regardless of what they were trained to do, regardless of how good they were in the boxing arena or how good they were with MMA. When they were faced with spontaneous violence under real emotional threat, because let's not forget what we're doing is permissive. And even if you're a little bit amped up when you're fighting somebody with a lightsaber, a longsword, whatever it is you're using, and there's some fear there, some adrenaline, there's still a permissibility to it and a safety to it. When people are faced with spontaneous violence, unless they've done it thousands of times, that motor skill isn't going to come out. Instead, what comes out is the same startle flinch mechanisms that have always been there. And it's with trained, untrained, same thing with knife attacks. This is the number one attack that kills people. Trained, untrained, doesn't matter.
Probably the best example of this is Aldo Nadi. Aldo Nadi is probably one of the fathers of modern fencing, considered one to be one of the best swordsmen ever, right? And he actually took a first blood duel, and I don't remember the date on this stuff, but there's photographs of this. And when the photographs were released of his performance in this duel, they showed him doing basically like thrusting with his back foot up, doing all these things which are expressly forbidden in his system and everything like that. They're rank amateur mistakes, right? And they're like, why did you do this? And Nadi himself said, with the fear of being cut, right, you lose almost, like it felt. And anybody who's fought, I think, and probably that, the first couple of times you do it, it feels like you're moving through molasses, right? Because you see what's going on, but you can't react fast enough, right? So
the temporal compression effect.
Yeah, it's crazy, and that takes work. When you're talking about those neuro things that are happening with people, you will revert back to these primitive patterns. And that's why we emphasize these things like hip hinges here. When we're talking about the knee, somebody asked a question about the knee and kneeling stance. If you're getting pain in your knee when you're doing the kneeling stance, this here, like this, you haven't tucked your hip enough. So what you want to do is as you get down there, when you start to feel the pain, just stick your butt out, right? And you can also think about gripping with the tops of your thighs to the bottom of your abs, right? You don't want to hunch, but you want to here. And I think a lot of times when people get the knee pain is because we've been told, oh, don't lean forward, don't do this thing. You have to lean forward. This is part of your body and stuff like that. Now, I wanted to get to one thing before we leave here. I don't have a whole lot of time left, but about the choreography and realism. Now, I am not a trained stage fight choreographer. That is not my skill set. I am a martial artist who actually has a background in performance. So I can apply performance principles to things. And I know enough people who do fight choreography that it gives me a little bit of information about that. But from a director's point of view, somebody who's not putting this together, when I'm trying to put together a fight that looks good, that looks realistic, I shouldn't say realistic because realistic is not the goal that we go for when we're doing things. Like Marvel isn't looking for realistic. They're looking for believable. And that's the whole difference. If you can make your choreography believable, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff, right? You just have to establish that these things can happen within your fight or they represent something. So a really good example of why fight choreography exists the way it does is if you watch a real fist fight, half of the time it doesn't even look like they're hitting each other. It looks like they're just kind of rubbing each other's faces with their fists, right? It doesn't look like the movies. It's not boom and you see a guy, react over here and teeth come. No, it doesn't look anything like that. It's just boom and just a mash of people, right? I'm not talking about street fights. I'm not talking about people who know what they're doing. And you know what's making street fights worse is MMA, because now everybody thinks they can do something.
Yeah, they watch a YouTube video.
Yeah, it's crazy, So, we don't want to do that. There is a right and a wrong way. There's a wrong way to do some of these things. Maybe there's not a right way, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah, I like to think of it as good, or goodest. And to your point, going back to what I was saying with motor skills, there were in this research, there were guys who did use their combat skills that they had trained on because they had done it thousands of times. And so the motor skill was literally internalized. It became a natural reflexive action versus a deliberate one. So and that takes several thousand repetitions. And that's an old school kind of tough guy thing to say, but it's true. The way of 10,000 cuts is what it is for a reason. That's how you get that skill to emerge from you unconsciously.
Yeah. And even when you get to that point, it's not going to happen all the time. You're not on your game every time. You're not this. Sometimes you're outmatched. Sometimes your opponent is better than you. And now you have to, you're way out of your comfort zone. That's why I always advise people to go spar with people who are better than you, right? That are intimidating to you, because they will force you to get to think outside of your box, to get to outside of what your preconceived notions of what is going to happen. That is almost 99% of when people say, get criticism of martial arts performances on this. It's like, oh yes, but if somebody did this, then you could easily come around and hit them in the shoulder and this, that, and the other. It's like, sure, you could do 1,000,001 things. The problem is that you won't necessarily think of that. Probably in 1,000,000 years, especially while somebody is trying to hit you at the same time.
Think before you act. If you're thinking while you're acting, you're losing time, and the other guy has already gotten 3 hits on you.
Exactly. You cannot think in a fight, and that's the whole thing. And then the other thing too that I've said before is there's this with novices and people who haven't done this a whole lot. There is this idea that when you're in a real fight, you are free, like you can do whatever you want, and that is totally the opposite. When you get into a free fight and the other and you just there's no rules or no boundaries or something like that, you're band of techniques that you can even try gets really narrow.
Yes.
Right? You are going to be forced to do something. That's why we always focus on basics, because if you have good basics, you have something to fall back on. But if you don't, you're going to forget all your tricks and your tricks won't work. So there you go. The armchair fighter. Yes, people, the armchair quarterback, the armchair fighter, all of that kind of thing. When it finally comes to blows, like you said, you've lost control of the situation. Now it's very much in the air. You want to get out as quickly as possible, either by taking.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about what we do is, because it is safe, because we're playing basically with expensive toys, because no one's really getting hurt, it's a good laboratory. We get to do what perhaps people before us didn't get to do. And that is, oh, you think you're that good? Okay, we'll try it. Well, it didn't work. Something failed out. All right, now you've got something to train on.
Right.
Now you've got, okay, let me, and this gets, I think we've talked about this before, this idea of there's more, sparring isn't just two people fighting.
Right.
There are ways we condition sparring so you can parry or post drills, whatever it is. So we can modulate sparring in certain ways so we can induce those reactions or induce those skills, you know, to cover that very thing. So we have opportunities, and that's the really good, point of pressure testing. You know, as it teaches us where our training, because you don't rise to your expectations, you fall to the level of your training. That's what happens in actual combat. Right. And determines how much of those things have you internalized. And you're absolutely right about basics. Advanced is to do the basics well. Every tough guy I know who's the real thing, they say basics, 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 basics. Internalize those basics so you could do them drunk and half dead. When you've got the basics to that point, then they become reliable for you.
Right. And the thing is even when you're very experienced, right? I've been fighting for you know, almost 2 decades now. You know, everything is different. It's you can't count on any one thing to happen, you know. And even when you're fighting at your highest level, most of the things you're going to be throwing are just basic stuff, right? Jabs. I mean, you can't get these crazy things. It's basically like a finishing move, right? You know, in Mortal Kombat, right? Most of the time you're just pressing the X button and the Y button, right? You know, once you get that opportunity, you can do the finishing move, but you got it.
Yeah, most of the time you're just smashing keys. You know what, when you're, especially like with weapons combat, look, I'm happy if I just get the weapon on the guy.
Yeah.
Regardless of how good the hit was, I managed to get my blade on him somehow. All right. I got a point, you know.
Yeah. All right. So, all right. So as we wind down here, do James Desso, you got anything to add, ask, or?
As somebody who's done Dagger here for about 5 years now, the whole line combat definitely comes into play. And you're exactly right where it comes to you fall to your highest level of training. You know, I've been doing the TPLA system longer, but I would incorporate everything that I've learned into that. And that just the basics get you through so much without having to do all the tricks. The tricks get you past that extra level, but the basics get you there.
Yeah. So that's the thing. When you're looking for stuff to train the basics, you know, go to those, you know, look at the formulas, you look at, learn those formulas and then apply them to those accelerations. The accelerations are going to give you way more. This is why I call them accelerations, right? They accelerate you. These are the things that will bring you forward. It's not the forms. The forms are almost like tests for you, and they're exercises and cardiovascular, things to get you fit and get you moving, right? They're not fights. They're not supposed to look like fights. That's not what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to give you the tools and the physicality that you need to bring to a fight. But you want that technique, it's those drills, right? Keep it simple, right? And even if you learn those accelerations, you go to the Dulon, a lot of that stuff is transferred right over. So, all right. Well, I'm going to end it here today because I have to run off. But I want to thank our class here. Jeff, James, Deso, John, Roberto hanging in the background there. We see you. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for everybody out there in YouTube land. If you're watching now, thanks for tuning in. If you're watching later, thanks for watching. So that is it for us today. We will see you next week. Same time, same channel. Patience practice.